top that Ed Broadbent served 14 years in a leadership capacity with the NDP against 4 different prime ministers. One of those prime ministers is former Prime Minister Joe Clark. You can see a picture of them there, along with Pierre Elliott Trudeau, another prime minister that Ed Broadbent faced off against in some capacity. The Right Honourable Joe Clark is with us now to reflect on his legacy. Hi, Mr. Clark. Such a pleasure to see you.
Very pleased to see you.
I appreciate you making the time for the conversation. You were on opposite ends of Parliament, the House of Commons, but also the political spectrum at the time for Mr. Broadbent, yet you had only really nice things to say upon his passing. What sticks out for you as the reason that that is the case?
Well, we were different parties, obviously, but I'm not sure you'd say opposite ends. We had
That's
a lot
true,
of,
maybe.
Yeah, we had quite common views on a lot of matters. In fact, one of the things that's quite interesting about that period and now is that there was a much greater degree of, I guess, respect and cooperation, practical cooperation between the two parties. That is not to say we always agreed. He brought my government down, for example, and that's a hard thing for me to forget. And I'm interested in him both in terms of his own personal capacity. I don't know that you could call us friends when we were in the House of Commons together. I think we became closer to friends later on, afterwards. We established an international commission of which he became president for a while. And then interestingly, in afterlife, we worked together as a small group of advisors to the Auditor General. And it was an intimate group, and we came, and not at all partisan, the opposite of partisan, and we came to know one another. And the other thing about our relationship was that during some of my more difficult times as Constitutional Affairs Minister, Ed was very supportive of what we were trying to do. Not every detail, of course, but he understood the challenges of those kinds of things. And I think we tend to see someone who was not ever in government, was always in opposition, as a person who will be inherently and overwhelmingly adversarial, and he could be adversarial. But he also had this broader interest, not only in the public interest, but he brought a point of view to politics. That's what made him seek public office.
And how would you define that point of view now, looking back in retrospect?
Oh, he was a social democrat, a proud social democrat. But he also had a broader view than that. He knew that that was a perspective of Canada that had to be expressed, had to be developed. He was very effective in it, as a matter of fact, not simply in his work in Parliament, but also as the inspiration for the Broadbent Foundation later on. I've been trying to think if there are any other comparable institutions like that, formed by someone in opposition. Obviously, there is a point of view in the country that represents those views, that feels it needs to be seen more, but he was a catalyst, or he was the person around whom the catalyzing process worked, because he had such broad respect, and respect also for sort of constructive common sense. He was not in a pejorative sense an ideologue. He had firm views, he expressed them, but he also was immensely practical in a lot of things.
He was pragmatic.
Pragmatic, and you come to know people a little bit better in times of difficulty, and we were both very much interested in constitutional matters and the Charter of Rights. We took opposite approaches. That is a chapter, by the way, you and your profession should look at as to how that debate evolved in Canada, because for the first time, I think, the Liberal government, a government, tried to set out before the issue arose to develop a sense that this is necessary and try to negotiate matters with opposition parties. In any event, and in the end, while he started as a supporter of the process and continued to be that, I started as a critic and continued to be that. But his party, under his leadership, ensured that the Charter included protection of Indigenous people. My party ensured that it protected the rights and status of women in the country. And we had working relationships on that kind of question.
You mentioned how you wouldn't, though you had a working relationship at the time while you were in politics, you wouldn't call each other friends, but perhaps later in the after political life that you became more so. What did you learn about him that you didn't know when you were political adversaries?
Well, I should go back to one thing. My first day in the House of Commons as leader, I was a young leader. I'd just been elected. I went in and I didn't know the mics were all on before, and so
It's a reporter's dream.
Yeah, I guess it is. But I was called upon. The speaker asked me to. It was my turn to get up and ask a question, and I said to myself, "Well, here goes," and of course it boomed out into the house, which I didn't know. That afternoon, after a long campaign, I left for a holiday, and the next morning, in question period, Ed mentioned that yesterday he said, "Here goes." Now he's gone, which I thought was which I thought was a human touch.
Right.
Obviously, it was a shot, but it was a funny shot, and it was the kind of shot that informed rather than wounded.
And did you feel like that is a quality that he espoused as you got to know each other more on a personal basis outside of politics?
Yeah, he was constructive by inclination. That's why he came to office, and I can't help reflecting now at the current state of politics.
I'm sure.
Yeah, because there has been the House of Commons has become much more adversarial to some degree, and I'm not blaming you. That has to do with your profession.
That's
It has
okay.
to do with the fact that we are now more a stage than an institution, a stage on which other points are made. And I think that affects the state of mind of people who come to serve there. Both Ed and I came into Parliament before television was there. We had a sense of the institution and a respect for the institution. And that's what we'd learned. I mean, both of us in our different ways, me as a progressive conservative, he as a social democrat. But that informed our attitude in the House towards one another, towards the public, toward Parliament. And it meant, I mean, I think back to some of the degrees of cooperation between some of the members of my party and some of the members of his outside the House, particularly on constitutional issues, particularly on international issues. Some of my MPs, some of his MPs were very active in making real progress on issues relating to Africa, for example. Mm-hmm. And that required a sense of camaraderie that I think might be more difficult now.
It's more difficult. Do you think it's impossible, though?
No, I hope it's not impossible. And in fact, I'm taking advantage of the opportunity because
Yes.
I think that there needs to be an understanding that there was an earlier way of doing these things, and that because one of its major proponents has died, mm-hmm. but rather than simply mourn him, it would be well worth taking a look at how some of the principles for which he stood can be respected now. And those were not simply procedural. They weren't just about the House of Commons. They were about what a society should be. He was quite unusual in that he was able to maintain his legacy after he left the formal office. And I think inspired, on the one hand, a lot of people who shared his view, but on the other, a respect among people who might have thought that social democrats were some kind of wild species. But we do have to try to come back to this, I think. I think the House of Commons can't avoid being a show place, but it has to be much more than a show place. And the focus has to be upon what gets done rather than what is seen. We're losing that now, and I think that there will be a growing cynicism. It's already, there's always been some cynicism about politics, but I think it could aggravate and grow.
Well, you're right. An occasion today, not only to mourn Mr. Broadbent, but to talk about that. Mr. Clark, I appreciate you making the time for the conversation. Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you.
The Right Honourable Joe Clark.